So Robert and Zendaya, they have the new movie coming out, which is the drama. We don't know what the drama is exactly. They didn't give that away in the trailer. But what I noticed is during one of those interviews, Robert and Zendaya, they're like asking each other questions, but he really gives the type of artist who plays on that starving artist trope, like the archetype of the artist that is misunderstood and doesn't understand how to communicate his art effectively, right? But he's not a starving artist because he's a successful capitalist who's like going to make a lot of money off their films. So he's not really misunderstood as he would like to think he is. But I do like him. I like him as just a person who has a lot of range. I like him like that. So I like that he's not confined by any particular character, because you have some actors who play the same character over and over again. I like the roles that he chooses because I feel like he really does stretch out his range and actually does challenge himself to do more. In their interview, he was talking about how he went to therapy one time and his therapist asked if he was on drugs. And I'm like, have you met anyone on drugs? That's not a compliment. Like that's very difficult for someone to assume that a healthy, thriving adult is on drugs, because substance abuse essentially is a failure of mental health, right? So when did art become attached to like mental health? The history of art wasn't always this trope of, oh, I'm a starving artist. I need to be able to feed my family and also thrive in a genre that I'm really passionate about. When did the image of Robert Pattinson become the image of art in general? So art is subjective because it's based on the lived experiences of both the person during that time and also their ethnicity, their geography, and belief systems, or the lived experience of their patrons, which is the person that is essentially giving them money to produce their art. I really found it interesting that somebody like Robert Pattinson has the difficulty of communicating his art. Art in the 19th century, which is considered modern art, focused on abstraction, individual expression, and experimentation. Art prior to the 19th century, the prehistoric art, ancient art, medieval, Gothic art, Renaissance, and Baroque held different functions like serving as religious utility, part of trade, adorned architectural aesthetic, like during the Baroque era, or capturing an ideological aesthetic while emphasizing realism, classical themes, and humanism, like in the Renaissance. Also held sexual function as illustrated in ancient Greek, Roman, and prehistoric art periods. But more so, artists were defined by their craftsmanship and not always by their names or notoriety. You wanted your art to come before you, so your art can live on. Even though you pass, your art will be your legacy. So a huge contrast, though, is that they were considered craftsmen. By the time of the Renaissance, though, artists were thought as visionaries. So before they were thought of as craftsmen, they were, really good masons. They were really good at sculpture. They were really good at working with the elements. They weren't considered struggling. They were considered basically the artists of our trades that we see today. Architecture, builders, they were very functional in our society, and they allowed their art to go before their individual names or identities. So by the time of the Renaissance, artists were thought of as visionaries by the patron who financially supported their work, as we see with Michelangelo and Da Vinci. After the 1848 revolutions against the ancient regimes and monarchies like the Austrian Empire, France, Germany, Italy, and Sicily, a new liberal spirit was ignited, which also encouraged by the social and cultural shift inspired by the Industrial Revolution. In early 19th century, considered the Romantic era, where the archetype of the starving artist emerges, and society begins to take artists less seriously. So think of Vincent van Gogh, who struggled with mental health, suffered for his craft, and famously sold only one painting during his lifetime. So this period marked as a shift towards more freelance and independent artistic practices without the constraints of church or state, but also without the financial support and societal respect that was established prior. The artists became as contentious as their creation in an uncertain market, alongside the individualism inspired by the post-revolution era. So art went from a respectable trade that was particular to its era, particular to its culture, and particular to the patrons that supported it because they also had a certain vision and they chose an individual who could express that vision as close to their imagination as possible. But then now it's the artist becomes the legend instead of the art that they're producing. Because they are independent, they are no longer able to afford their lifestyle because they don't have anyone supporting them. What comes with poverty is obviously stress because when you're supporting yourself, your mental health will be challenged. So these are the people actively pushing against the status quo, forcing a mirror to society and rejecting previous trends that didn't serve them or ideologies they built over time. Struggle was the canvas behind the narrative of their art and society. They were considered misunderstood or visionaries beyond their time, but without the same weight that visionaries in the past were praised and supported through patronage. Society romanticized their struggle and financial ineptitude by ascribing them as noble because they were able to persevere in spite of their lack of financial stability. So when you look at Robert Pattinson's interview with Zendaya, he hints at the disheveled, misunderstood, wincing artist trope who is consumed by their craft, but he also tends to underestimate how important articulation is. He gives the persona that his art transcends the necessity of verbal communication. And that actually reminds me of the conversation around like Elon Musk. There was an interview his ex-wife did concerning Elon Musk and their conversation around people that she's met that have met Elon. And they'll say to her, oh yeah, I've met Elon, he's great, or he's this. And then Elon says, oh, well, they're boring. Most people in the comments who were part of that interview who were like, there is actual credit should be given to those who can communicate. And honestly, it should be because when you're out and about and you're not able to stretch your abilities to accommodate the crowd that you're in, that's a limitation. And I think we definitely romanticize autism, autistic spectrum, because we think, again, that the misunderstood is better than the understood. So again, I think we're romanticizing the disheveled, misunderstood archetype that Robert Pattinson may be intentionally or unintentionally pursuing. It's food for thought to consider that we maybe give too much credit to where credit's not due. I don't think he should be given credit for being misunderstood. I don't think it's healthy. An individual who is able to accommodate new environments, new people, new surroundings is the mark of a healthy, mentally strong individual. I think we give too much credence to those who aren't able to work or obtain those skills. So I think it's a very interesting way to live. But I like Robert Pattinson. I think he's a remarkable artist. I love most of his work. Mickey, Batman, that's the most recent work that I've seen. But also Remember Me, huge fan of Remember Me. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to see that you do have that conflict of interest in a way where he wants to come off as against the system, not your average artist who is misunderstood like the Trope, but he's a successful capitalist. He gets paid millions of dollars to show up on screen. So there's only so far you can take that trope before you become a contentious figure. Please, what do you think in the comments? Is that the mark of a genius? Someone who can't work a room, someone who can't communicate, like Robert Pattinson. He'd rather allow his therapist to think that he's on drugs instead of maybe internalize the fact that he doesn't know how to communicate very well or explain his art verbally. So maybe that should be something that he should focus on improving instead of saying, I'm misunderstood. That's just part of my demeanor. Take it or leave it.